Little groggy getting going this morning, fellas. 6:05. It is great to be here on KCMO 95.7 FM. I was just partying too hard last night with the White Dudes for Kamala event that is taking storm across the nation. And, you know, I got the invite. I couldn't turn them down. So I was partying hard all night. It was an absolute banger. This White Dudes for Kamala Zoom gathering that crossed the nation. And it turned out to be quite a party. So if I'm struggling this morning, John, Mark will have to carry the show. But, you know, you guys know how it is.
Well, I mean, have you guys all, let's see, got the truce with the Bernie Bros and the Yang Gang? Are we all together there? Are we affiliates now?
You know, I think everyone's together against Donald Trump. I don't know if they're all together, you know, when it comes to every single policy item and issue. But for the most part, you know, they're all singing the same song and dance. I'll leave it at that.
Should we get bowling shirts or softball jerseys where, like, I'll just have deplorable across my chest and the other guys can have Yang Ganger and, you know, Bernie Bro? We'll just start wearing our team shirts.
I think that makes sense. We can just skip the whole voting process. They can just, you know, count us up by T-shirts outside of the polling places.
It's so white dudes. That's funny.
Oh, gosh. Well, this, and by the way, if you want to go buy a White Dudes for Kamala shirt, which I might get for the entire staff, I will add, if you go to the website and you want to buy one of these White Dudes for Kamala shirt, the male model is a black guy, which just cracks me up. It's freaking hysterical. The model for White Dudes for Kamala on the website is a black dude. Please, somebody help me make it make any sense. Yeah. Unbelievable.
We can get our shirts and then hit the placard as we walk in.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. Oh, my goodness.
Mine needs to be something modest but chic. I'd like a V-neck if they have that, you know.
Yeah. A schmedium V-neck for John Anthony. That's right. It is White Dudes for Kamala tight tee. That's going to be quite a look around the radio station, John. Oh, gosh, I'm getting excited just thinking about it. Could you imagine, by the way, if Donald Trump had, you know, a T-shirt he was selling called White Dudes for Trump? I mean, Rachel Maddow would have been crying on television last night about how this is, another sign of Nazism and the Klan coming back to take control of the United States.
White lash.
And yes, exactly right. That's what we would have heard from, you know, Joy. Imagine Joy Reid. I mean, Joy Reid, she might have exploded live on television if Donald Trump was selling White Dudes for Trump tees and, you know, creating groups like White Guys for Trump. We are seeing in front of our own very eyes, you know, we're all of a week or so into Kamala Harris being the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party. And we are witnessing what this campaign is going to be about as it finds its footing. It is going to be DEI in a nutshell. It is going to be driven by skin color and sex and nothing more. And I don't mean like sex, I mean your gender sex is what this is going to be about. So you've seen that. You've seen the foundation for that, by the way, over the last week or so. You know, they have tried to drive up, and they will try to really drive up the gender gap. We know that men are breaking heavily for Donald Trump. We know that women were breaking heavily for Joe Biden. But they're going to try to run up the numbers on female voters, notably single female voters. And they're hoping that will get them across the finish line, especially in some of the key states where they need to win to obviously win this election. So you're seeing that when it comes to the gender issue. And then you're seeing it also on the racial side. You know, we're having fun with this, but there actually was a White Dudes for Kamala Harris virtual call. And I actually have some audio from it. And this is not parody. This is not satire. Let's roll some of the best clips from the White Dudes for Kamala Harris Zoom call that took place last night.
I'm white, I'm a dude, and I'm for Harris.
Over the last few years, you know, I've been thinking a lot about men.
I'm not sure if you guys can recall that feeling you had on the night of Tuesday, November 8th, 2016. I stood over my kid's bed and I wept.
White nationalists in MAGA, they want to speak for you. you specifically as white men.
In the marginalized communities that educate me every single day, that this is a constant education for all of us.
Kamala is carrying on her shoulders 248 years of pain, of agony, of hope, of frustration. And no matter how high she jumps, no matter how many degrees she has, no matter how good her grades are, she's never good enough because they're always moving the line.
What a variety of whiteness we have here, with like a rainbow of beige.
Oh my gosh. That was it, John. You really missed out last night, man. I mean, you'll have to join me for the next one.
Oh, man.
Oh, my gosh. You can't make it up. That was literally white dudes for Kamala Harris.
That sound I hear is the sound of man cards being yanked all over America.
The guy that wept for his children, I think, was the voice of Olaf from that Disney movie Frozen.
You think was that Josh Gad?
I think so.
Oh, man.
I don't really see him in other movies. I just know his voice.
Let's get confirmation of that if we could, because if that was Josh Gad, then I have lost even. I don't know if I can let my kids watch Frozen anymore, and they love Frozen. They love Olaf. I mean, heck, the amount of Olaf stuff I have around this house is unbelievable.
Mark and I were wondering if the guy who said he'd been thinking about men over the last year maybe got on the wrong Zoom call. Might have been looking for Tubin or somebody.
Oh, my goodness. It's like, the guys that show up on the Zoom calls are actually the ones who then want to record themselves to then use it on their, blind dates that they go on trying to pick up women or something like that. It's like, guys, I don't care how hard you try. It's not going to happen for you.
It looks like it was him. I'm sorry to say.
It was him? No.
Luke Skywalker was in there, too.
Oh, man. Oh, man. See, all these white dudes, they all look the same, so I couldn't tell who was who. But, all right, Josh Gad, voice of Olaf in Frozen, wept over his children's beds after Trump got elected back in 2016. That tells you a lot about him, right?
I'm thinking of a show like they've got Real Housewives. We could have real white dudes of Hollywood and have a serial, real white dudes of Atlanta, real white, all these places.
How about Kansas City? You, me, and Mark.
Oh, fine. Well, I probably won't be
Not sure we're the white dudes they're looking for, but,
right.
We'd have a good time, if nothing else. It'd be, certainly wouldn't be PG.
Masculinity.
We're too dude for them. That's all I know. So you're seeing them. Yeah. They're breaking everything down by gender and then by race. And they're using Hollywood to do it. And they're using social media to do it. And that's what they're going to drive this campaign on, because it all ties back then to Kamala Harris. Black, although half Jamaican, half Indian woman, becoming the first president to fill all those boxes in the United States. So that's why they are going to segment this on gender and race, because it all ties back to the candidate. And the biggest pull that the candidate has is not any accomplishments of note, especially as vice president. They don't want to talk about her record in the Senate, where she was, by basic metrics, noted as the most liberal U.S. senator before she became the VP. They don't want to talk about those things. They have to make it about DEI. So we're going to see this in real time. We are going to see whether or not somebody can get elected to the White House. Obama had incredible political talent. Kamala Harris is not Barack Obama, so we will see if they can drag her across the finish line, John.
I got a preview for What If Wednesday. Okay, so what if some of our conservative Hollywood people decide to go ahead, now that the white dudes for Harris has been out there, and say, okay, well, we're going to do white dudes for Trump. All right. Well, then they'll be accused of being racist.
Oh, of course.
Because the original intent of this message was to support the black female.
Yes, bingo. That's why it will never happen, to your point.
Yep.
And, they will be banned, of course, from Hollywood if they were to ever do some white dudes for Trump shtick. And they know that. I mean, they know that they cannot do something like that. But Josh Gad can look like the biggest loser of all time on a Zoom call and talk about how he cried over his children's bed after Trump got elected and still be taken seriously and get jobs. But if you ever said you voted for the guy who half of America is going to vote for, you'll get blackballed. I mean, what a world, what a time to be alive. 913-408-7957. That's our studio line and our text line here on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM, and streaming, of course, on the KCMO Talk Radio app. We'll get to also what's going on in big tech land. If you've been on Facebook lately and you've been wondering why you've been seeing some things that just don't seem right, same with Google, we'll tell you what's going on next. So I started seeing this go viral. It was actually Sunday I saw this on Google. And if you typed in on Google, assassination attempt on, you would think that Donald Trump would be the first one to show up, right? Like, that would make sense for the guy who is the, GOP nominee and the former president would be the one that people were, if they were Googling assassination attempt on, you would think that Donald Trump's name would be like the first one to pop up. Well, it wasn't. They would show up with Reagan. They would show up with all these other names, but Donald Trump's name was not showing up on Google. You know how Google will predict what you're going to search for when you start typing into google.com? Trump's name was nowhere to be found. So I tried it for myself on Sunday, and I started typing in assassination attempt on, and, Trump's name is not on the list, not on the drop-down options from Google. So then I put in assassination attempt on T, like for Trump. Nothing shows up. I start typing TRUM, and here's what shows up. So I've typed into Google at this point on Sunday afternoon, assassination attempt on Trump, without the P, TRUM. And here are the options that Google gave me. Assassination attempt on Truman. Failed assassination attempt on President Truman. Assassination attempt on President Truman. Assassination attempt on Harry Truman. Trump's name never came up in the drop-down options from Google. So then Google came out and basically fixed it. So now if you look that up and you say, okay, assassination attempt on, the first thing to come up is Donald Trump. But this was not the case over the weekend. So it just goes to show you how these big tech companies can tweak their algorithms in a 1984-esque way to literally whitewash history. And history not from, 20 years ago or 200 years ago, but literally 2 weeks ago. So if you try it now, you will see assassination attempt on, and Donald Trump will be the first option. I mean, as it should be, because that's what people are Googling. But it was not the case 2 days ago, and I screenshotted it, and I put it up on my X account at Pete Mundo, and you can see it there. So that was Google in the last couple of days. Now, Facebook had itself a major issue as well, and they corrected this yesterday, but the only reason I bet you they corrected it is because they got an incredible amount of backlash. So the iconic photo of Donald Trump, pumping his fist in the air, blood is streaming down his face, the American flag is over his left shoulder, right? I mean, it is one of the all-time iconic photos now in American political history. Well, Facebook was flagging that photo as altered. So you would not be able, if you had shared that photo, as millions of people had done over the last few days, Facebook began flagging that picture as an altered photo or video. So you would not be able to see it. And what they say here is if you posted that photo or tried to view that photo on Facebook, you would get a black screen that would say third-party fact checkers found a similar photo to be altered in another post. And they use USA Today as their reasoning for why that's not a real picture and why that is something that was altered. Well, that was obviously wildly inaccurate, and that also is an example, potentially, of big tech just trying to basically say any photos, any mention, any discussion, any imagery around Donald Trump nearly being assassinated, we don't want that on our platform. And it is amazing. I mean, I was thinking about it the other day. It's only been 2.5 weeks since this happened, and it feels like, based on how the media has barely covered it since then, it was 2 years ago. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's old news. We're moving on. We got to, start kissing Kamala's butt. It's like, no. This guy still 2.5 weeks removed from nearly losing his life, this country being in a much different place than it is today, and still more questions than answers. So what did Facebook say yesterday afternoon? They admitted to this being an error. And they say their fact check was initially applied to a doctored photo showing the Secret Service agents smiling, and in some cases, their systems, they say, incorrectly applied that fact check to the real photo. They say this has been fixed, and they apologize for the mistake. Now, I did see that altered image as well, where, somebody made the Secret Service agent smiling in the photo as Donald Trump has blood dripping down his face and he's walking or getting carried off the stage. That, yes, was an altered photo. But in Facebook's AI-driven universe, you're telling me that they just accidentally also flagged the original photo as being altered? If you want to take them at their word, that's your prerogative. I'm not willing to go there just yet, and I don't think anybody should, based on their history, based on their background, based on, Mark Zuckerberg's involvement with the Zuckerbucks, 4 years ago. Now, I know he says he's not doing that, and if you listen to Mark Zuckerberg talk, he does sound like a guy who is more open and has warmed to Donald Trump, as many in Silicon Valley have over the last couple of years, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you he's a diehard Donald Trump voter. I highly doubt he is. But the fact that you can have people, no idea who they are. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg's not doing this algorithmic stuff, right? At this point, Mark Zuckerberg's a figurehead. He's not doing the day-to-day algorithmic work that needs to be done. The fact that somebody is able to do stuff like this on the back end for Facebook and the back end for Google, and then only flip it back after they get called out, is very telling about where the conversation goes around big tech in this country, not just through this election cycle, but for years to come afterwards. Because, 1984 doesn't seem all that far off anymore now, does it? Pete Mundo on KCMO News coming up, and then we'll get you the latest on the Supreme Court plans from the president and what it actually could mean next. Well, yesterday should not be overlooked. Yesterday should not be understated when it comes to Joe Biden's attack on democracy, since that's the phrase that gets so much attention, right? I mean, literally, the entire campaign for Joe Biden and for Kamala Harris, a big part of it at least, is that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Now, that is very, very rich, of course, coming from a side that has used its levers of power to, many would argue, attack democracy over the last few years. But either way, I mean, let's drop the rhetoric and let's just look at what Joe Biden rolled out yesterday. And that was an op-ed in the Washington Post that called for radical changes to the judicial branch. He did this as a guy who was obviously leaving office in a few months. He spoke about these plans at the LBJ Presidential Library in Austin, Texas, and he talked about term limits. He would like Congress to quickly establish term limits on Supreme Court justices and an enforceable ethics code for the court's 9 justices. He also called on lawmakers to ratify a constitutional amendment limiting presidential immunity. So this is a dramatic change in the judicial branch that Joe Biden is proposing. And first off, I find it rich that a guy who literally is who he is, because there are no term limits, a man who has not had a job, a real job, outside of being a politician in half a century, calling on term limits, I find that to be awfully rich from the President of the United States. But on top of that, I give Joe Biden credit leading up to this point yesterday, where this is what his diehard leftist base wanted. Because they don't like the makeup of the Supreme Court. So they just want to change the rules of, 250 years to appease their wants and needs. And Joe Biden, to his credit, for the last 3.5 years, never bit on any of this. He said, basically, no, nothing ever came of it. There were calls to do things like this and propose things like this, and he basically ignored it. And, there's not much that I feel like Joe Biden has done well during his time in office, but I at least respected the fact that he never entertained this kind of lunacy. Because all this is a bunch of spoiled brats upset that they didn't get exactly their way. Donald Trump was rightfully elected. Donald Trump got lucky in getting to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, one in Ruth Bader Ginsburg because she was too confident in her own health, and Father Time is undefeated, and she sadly passed away. So Donald Trump got to appoint a 3rd Supreme Court justice. But guess what? If Hillary Clinton wasn't Hillary Clinton, she probably beats Donald Trump, and then she or whoever would have gotten those 3 Supreme Court nominees.
Yep.
That's how it works, John.
Well, those crazy Supreme Court justices, they've got people parading outside their house threatening to kill them,
Yes,
nothing was done about
do.
that. We didn't need to change anything there, apparently. No.
No way, no how.
It's all rooted in this, I don't know, it's been going on for several decades. When you can't get your wackiness through as laws in Congress, and there's always judicial activism. Well, suddenly that's not going their way.
Right? Exactly right.
Yep.
I mean, they use the Supreme Court to basically...
All courts, right?
All courts, yes, all courts. No doubt about it. But certainly the Supreme Court they have used for a long time on many key cases, Roe being one of them, to basically create a law of the land without having anything pass Congress.
Yep.
I mean, that's what they've done. And now the Supreme Court makeup is not to their political benefit. Well, so it must be blown up as a system. We can't have this system anymore as far as they're concerned. Yeah, it's not fair. Yeah, that's basically what they say. So you think about this, and you think about what Joe Biden proposed yesterday in the Washington Post, and it really is, I mean, of all the things he's done that have been questionable when it comes to the Constitution, this really is as concerning as anything, because what I think he's signaling here to the Democratic base is this idea that it's okay to feel this way about the Supreme Court. Let's undermine the entire judicial branch, headlined by the Supreme Court, because as far as we're concerned, it's an illegitimate body until we get these changes. Now, these changes are not coming. Congress is not passing term limits on the Supreme Court because Joe Biden, now a lame duck, put an op-ed in the Washington Post. So it's not about whether or not it's going to happen. It's not going to happen. Don't let anybody fearmonger you into thinking it's going to happen, at least not with the current makeup of Congress. Of course, that can always change. But what it's really about is about using this as another talking point during the election year to drum up enthusiasm in the liberal base. That's the purpose of this. So what should happen here locally? Well, I would love to get a statement from Sharice Davids on whether or not she agrees with Joe Biden's op-ed on putting term limits on Supreme Court justices. I'd like to hear what she, and that's how it always works on the other side, right? Like somebody throws out an idea, the leader of the party throws out an idea, and every Republican on Capitol Hill gets a microphone stuck in his or her face saying, what do you think about this idea? But it never happens, it seems like, the other way. I mean, is Sharice Davids going to put out a statement on this? I'll reach out to her office today and at least try to get something written. I know she's not going to come on to talk about this, but at least get some kind of written statement as to where she is on Joe Biden's proposal. We know the Kansas City Star is not going to do it. We know, unfortunately in television, there are no political reporters left to do the job. I mean, Michael Mahoney's still doing some work, our buddy over at Channel 9, but there is not that person at each of these local TV stations to say, wow, this is quite an explosive piece from the president. We should find out what Sharice Davids in a swing district here in Kansas thinks about this. So, if we got to do the heavy lifting for Kansas City, we're more than happy to do it. We'll gladly do what needs to be done on that front. So that will be part of my post-show work today. I'd be curious to hear from Emmanuel Cleaver as well on this very issue. Not nearly as much of a swing district as Sharice Davids, although you could argue Sharice Davids is not really in a swing district either. But regardless, I would like to know from our locally elected federal representatives who are of Joe Biden's party what they think about this proposal yesterday that he wrote about in the Washington Post. So you think about Joe Biden and you think about this idea and the proposal. And yes, justices already have a code of conduct, as some of you are noting on the text line. They enforce that is nearly the same as the judicial code. The difference is demand for outside enforcement. That's what this is really about. Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee want the lower court judges to investigate charges of ethics violations and then rule on the justices' behaviors. What could possibly go wrong politically on that front? Where you've got lower court justices, maybe appointed by, let's say, a Democratic president, enforcing and investigating charges of ethics violations against, let's say, Trump or Bush-appointed Supreme Court justices. What could possibly go wrong politically? You think our courts are political now and weaponized now. Just wait until something like that is on the table. Now, Joe Biden said in a statement yesterday that it will restore trust and accountability to the court and our democracy, but it would really do the opposite. You would have enormous numbers of ethics complaints, amplified by the press and partisans, and it would leave the public with the impression of routine corruption. And it would undermine everything the Supreme Court has done. And that's in large part what this is also about. Undermining the institution of the Supreme Court because they don't like the makeup of it. That's also what this does. Try to cut the Supreme Court off at its knees and delegitimize it. Once again, some might call that an attack on democracy. I'm not there yet, because I don't think those are the kinds of phrases we want to just willy-nilly throw around. But based on other definitions and other people's and politicians' definition of the word and the phrase, you could make the strong case, John, that fits right in.
Well, there's a Constitution. It's just hamstringing him, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's
gosh.
They signal that, right? Ketanji Brown Jackson. It's like, that's First Amendment rights hamstring. Well, exactly. And they're trying to dismantle. We'll get to the Electoral College later. They complain about that. They want to get rid of that. But now we're focused on Supreme Court, like you're saying.
If they don't like the rules, they just want to change them. Kevin's in Platte City. What's up, Kevin? You're on KCMO. Good morning.
Good morning, Pete. Hey, I'm listening to you, man. I agree with everything you're saying. The thing I see is Joe Biden now has relinquished everything. He's just following what anybody else tells him to do. He's taken all the hard things that Kamala represents and what she wants to do, and he's become the mouthpiece for that. And they can throw it out there and see how the waters flow with it. And like you said, you want to talk to Sharice Davis. Hey, if it's not going good, she can back off of it a little bit. But if it's going good and people are liking it, then she'll jump right in. It's a safeguard.
Yeah. No, that's well said, Kevin. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. Two things are going on here. One, there's an attempt to really drum up the base, the very hardcore liberal base of the Democratic Party with some of these, Zoom rallies and some of these ideas that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have rolled out, while then also having the media do their bidding for trying to convince the broad swath of the American public that she's really just a moderate that has been misrepresented. Those two things are going on simultaneously right now. 913-4087-957. It's 646 on a Tuesday morning. Don't forget Tirade Tuesday's coming up at 8:30. That's going to be a doozy. It always is. So start thinking about your tirades here on KCMO 95.7 FM. 913-408-7957. It is one of the more radical proposals that you will see that was not just like an off-the-cuff comment. It was actually an op-ed written in the Washington Post yesterday by the president saying, hey, term limits on Supreme Court justices and also having a new way to investigate them for ethics violations. And if you think about, what is nearly now 250 years of having the laws in place in this country, to have just, willy-nilly president write an op-ed in one of the most, read newspapers in America saying, hey, it's time to stop doing it that way. If that was done in reverse, my goodness, you'd have Morning Joe, you'd have CNN, you'd have all of them out there right now screaming about, attacks on democracy. But yesterday, it's just a casual op-ed by the president calling to radically change the leadership in the judicial branch, the Supreme Court. So nothing to see here. Ronnie is on KCMO. He's in Rosedale. What's up, Ronnie?
Hey, good morning, Pete. Back when it's like when they came out with their deep fakes and cheap fakes comments out of the White House, whenever that was, about 3 weeks ago or so, almost a month maybe. But the very next day, you came out and body slammed them with your Orwell comment out of 1984. And I was sitting there, I went, God, right now, Pete Mendo is Bill O'Reilly's smartest guy on the radio for coming up with that. And every day since then, it's the longest streak of being right, I think, that anybody's ever had. You've nailed the 24-hour news cycle almost every day with a high level of critical analysis. You're right there at the top of your game, and I'll bet there's a lot of your listeners out there that know that I'm close to being right too.
Well, Ronnie, thank you for that. The check's in the mail, buddy, and I think that also says just as much about some of the pathetic media that we have in this town, and that is radio, where too many people are just looking for yucks. And listen, we have a good time here too on this show, trust me. We'll be laughing as much as anybody here on KCMO, but we'll do it through the prism of what's going on in this town and what's going on in the country and what's going on around the world. And, TV media has become a shell of what it was. Let's be honest. Television media in this town is basically just a game of hiring as many fresh out of college, deer in the headlights kids as you possibly can for no money who have no idea what they're doing running around Kansas City. And then a Kansas City Star that is nothing but a mouthpiece for liberal thought in America through the prism of Kansas City news. That's it. So those are your options. So I appreciate it, Ronnie. I will take that as a very nice compliment from you. But it also is quite a condemnation of where the media is at in Kansas City right now. And it's sad. I wish it wasn't the case. As much as it's better for us to be the only ones that are actually able to get you the facts of what's going on certain news stories around here, it's better for us that that's the case. I don't celebrate it because it's disappointing that so many people are consuming other media outlets in Kansas City and just aren't getting the real story on what's happening on too many of these things. 913-408-7957. Jim's out east. Go ahead, Jim. You're on KCMO.
Yeah, Pete, he's right, too. But the deal is that Joe Biden's already undermined the Supreme Court by saying, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to go ahead and give everybody their money back for their, student loans. And then on top of that, he's delegitimized them by, just saying that where's the judges backing him saying that what they're doing now is wrong? There's no other judge coming out and saying we need to change this because Joe Biden says so.
Well, the judges, I get what you're saying, Jim. The judges are not going to go on the record on this, unless they're kind of cornered and asked about it. But I see what you're saying. I'd love for somebody to, call them out after this op-ed yesterday in the Washington Post calling for term limits on the Supreme Court, which is just absolutely insane. But that's not going to happen. The Supreme Court, to their credit, even the Supreme Court justices I disagree with, for the most part, they're not out there releasing statements to the media unless their office gets asked about something. Now, should their office be asked about this? I'd be open to that, but it really isn't up to them anyway. The only way that the Supreme Court justices would really be able to opine on this is if something like this actually got to the Supreme Court. And think about that. That's entirely possible. Not that it's going to happen because this Congress is not going to pick it up, but it's entirely possible if everything were to happen to put term limits on the Supreme Court, that issue could then end up at the Supreme Court. How incredible would that be? Think about it from that perspective. Real quick, Paul in Kansas City. Go ahead, buddy.
Hey, real quick, we got the Communist Democratic Party. What they want to do is, Pete, they want to be like California, where you have a commissar at the top, you have a Politburo, and the commissar runs the court. So they want to make California national. That's exactly what they want to do. So the top of the party controls the courts, and you got a Politburo. look at California. That's exactly how they run, and that's how they want us to live in the rest of the country. Alabama, they want Alabama to be like California.
Well, you know what? If there is a state that is a proof of how not to operate, it's California. California is the most beautiful state in the country, and it has been destroyed by its politics. I mean, it is the ultimate example of why these policies are utter failures. Well, it's a great segue. We had a nice couple of callers there in the last segment just before 7 o'clock, talking one in particular about how there are just conversations that we'll have on this show that you will not get elsewhere, especially in Kansas City media. And this next story is prime example of just that as we get to 7:05 on a Tuesday here on KCMO 95.7 FM. As always, we are streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. KCUR, woke KCUR, the national panhandler radio of Kansas City, is trying to undermine the idea that paying cops is a good thing. The same organizations, the same media outlets that were sympathetic to those who wanted to burn down the plaza because of a bad police encounter in Minneapolis are now suggesting that Kansas City paying its cops more money is really not the answer to anything. And they do this long-winded piece that they posted here yesterday saying, quote, headline, Kansas City and other police departments are offering big raises. Does it work? And the article basically suggests that there are certain police departments like Kansas City who are giving some big pay raises to their cops. Kansas City has budgeted a 30% increase in police salaries for the 2024-2025 year. And they go to different departments around the country, and they point out that in some departments, the raises are only like 3%. Yet those departments are fully staffed. But in places like Kansas City, they're offering big raises, and they're not fully staffed. And the suggestion then, and the implication then from KCUR, National Panhandler Radio's outlet here in Kansas City, is that what that means is that raises do not equate to being fully staffed. Well, no kidding. No one's suggesting that it does. There will be suburban departments that do not have to give 30% pay raises because guess what? You're not chasing around bad guys who are shooting at you and trying to kill you every night at 2 a.m. Like many people in East Patrol with KCPD are tasked with doing on a too frequent basis. Let's just be honest. I'm not, saying one is better than another. I'm not picking and choosing police departments. We back the blue here on KCMO across the board. From urban to suburban to exurban to rural counties, we'll do it all with our Back the Blue tour. But it's a little bit different if you're on the East Patrol beat for KCPD than if you are working in the DeSoto Police Department. I'm not judging either side. Let's just be honest. It's a very different job, though. And one job puts you at a much greater risk of your own life than the other one. Those are facts. So the job that puts you at more risk for your life is the one that's going to be harder to recruit for, and the one where you're going to need to potentially pay more money to get people to do that said job. That's what we call capitalism. People will put their lives on the line, especially when they care about their communities, but guess what? It's going to cost you. And because Kansas City leadership, in large part, has allowed its community to devolve into record-setting year after record-setting year of murders, it is more difficult because of the danger that the job entails to recruit people to those said jobs. You're smart. You're following along with me, right? This is pretty much common sense. But what KCUR is trying to accomplish here is two things. One, basically suggest that raises for cops of this kind of magnitude are completely meaningless and not actually worth it. And two, just devalue law enforcement even more, which they've been doing for the better part of 4 years since George Floyd was killed. I mean, it predates a lot of that, but I'm talking about really on steroids. The damage that media did in Kansas City for KCPD but also across the country in urban departments will take a generation to dig out of. Because what you've seen for the last bunch of years is early retirements, people leaving the job, people not maybe coming to a job that they otherwise would have been interested in because they're just like fed up. They're like, I'm going to have no community support. I'm not going to have a city council that really has my back in too many cases. And then on top of that, I got a media that's trying to tear me down. And if I make a split-second decision, that even if it ends up being the right decision, cough, cough, Eric DeValcanair, I could end up in prison. I won't see my kids grow up. Those are the decisions that too many who are considering law enforcement, especially in urban departments, are now having to make. And yes, you'll get a pension, and yes, there are certainly benefits to working for a police department that do not exist in the private sector. But still, when it comes down to it, you are putting your life on the line as a police officer, especially in more urban departments. And very rarely is anybody with a public voice outside of, this show and a couple of others going to have your back. And that's also part of the problem. And KCUR brilliantly owns itself. Now, they don't realize that they're owning themselves with this dopey piece, but this is exactly the kind of stuff that is causing KCPD to have to offer 30% pay raises just to try to get people to take the job. And by the way, they're still not going to have the level of interest that they had a generation ago. I've talked to cops with this department, and they were like, man, when we were trying to get in, there were hundreds of guys and gals who were applying to get into the police academy and who were taking the tests and doing everything they had to do to try to get this job. Now they're kind of begging people. I mean, yes, there's still people taking the tests and wanting to be cops, but it's not nearly as competitive as it was a generation ago. And what does that mean? That means that the quality of candidate, just by the pure numbers, is not going to be what it was 25, 30 years ago. It can't. I mean, if you're recruiting 50 people for a job and you have 400 people apply, or you're recruiting 50 people for a job and 75 apply, it's a pure numbers game. You're going to get a better 50, most likely, when you've got 400 applicants for the job versus 75. That's just math. And then on top of that, as you note on the text line, 913-408-7957, Pete, don't forget the prosecutor factor. When you have awful prosecutors, especially this one in Jackson County led by Gene Peters Baker, and you genuinely want to be a cop and you want to arrest bad guys, and then you want to make sure that the system takes care of these said bad guys instead of having to arrest the same bad guys week after week, month after month, year after year. You want to talk about demoralizing. That's the definition of demoralizing. And that happens in this community as well. And of course, KCUR is not going to, they're not going to touch Gene Peters Baker with a 10-foot pole. They're one of her great mouthpieces. Between them and the Kansas City Star, it's a battle between who's slobbering more over the office. And it's one of the major problems you have in this community. But what do they want to do instead? Attack the cop who's putting his life on the line night after night for maybe getting a 20, 30% pay raise. And we're not talking about 30% from, $150,000. We're talking about 30% maybe from $40,000. Which is a very big difference. 913-408-7957. On a lighter note, how did Donald Trump respond when he was asked about Melania's reaction to him nearly being assassinated 2.5 weeks ago? It was vintage Donald Trump. It will bring a smile to your face, and we'll play it for you next on KCMO 95.7 FM. We are streaming on the KCMO Talk Radio app. Well, this was a first from President Trump, and frankly, this is the kind of stuff that he should have included in his RNC speech a couple of weeks ago, which was not up to the moment. I'm sorry, that speech was way too long. It droned on. Most people were checked out after the first 20 minutes. What did it go, an hour and a half? I mean, after he talked about nearly getting killed, there was nothing new there for Donald Trump. And he did a pretty good job explaining, what he was feeling, what it was like in that moment in Butler, Pennsylvania, in the opening 15, 20 minutes. But there was a humanizing element to Donald Trump last night when he was asked by Laura Ingraham what Melania was doing and what Melania's response was and reaction was to her husband nearly getting killed 2.5 weeks ago in Butler, Pennsylvania. And this is the kind of humanizing moment that Donald Trump needs to have more of if he's going to finish this thing off and win this election come November. Here he was last night.
What was Melania's reaction, if you don't mind my asking? I know this is very personal, when she learned about what happened on that field in Butler?
She was watching.
Oh, she was watching in real time?
She was watching live. It was all over the place. It was on television. It was on your network, but it was all over the place. And she was watching. I asked her that. I mean, I wasn't there. I was on the ground. And when the world started to, like, you could talk to people, I said, so what was you feeling? And she was, she can't really even talk about it.
Traumatized.
Which is okay, because that means she likes me.
She
loves me.
That's good.
I mean, let's say she could talk about it freely. That wouldn't be, I'm not so sure which is better. But she either likes or loves me, and that's nice. But I will say this, look, she was, when I went down, she thought the worst had happened, because I went down. And I grabbed my, and I saw it was, my hand was loaded up with blood. You see it in slow motion, instant replay. You know, we had hundreds of press there. So this was covered live. They would have had instant replay and everything else, which they already do in this. But supposing the worst happened, you know, one man, Corey, was killed, hit horribly,
amazing man,
horribly in the head. And, you know, to guard it, he was guarding his family.
That's why how important it is to get to the bottom of why this was allowed to occur.
That was Donald Trump last night. Of course, it got serious on the back end. But that's an all-time Trump line right there. Talking about his own wife. Well, she either likes me or loves me. And that's nice, says Donald Trump. That's the kind of moment that Trump needs to have more of. That's actually, it's very Trumpian. 99.9% of people can't pull it off if they tried, but is also endearing in a Trumpian kind of way. And those are the things that will, in many respects, help him. And I feel like the campaign in general has been in a weird place over the last week. Since the old switcheroo of Biden for Harris, they're once again trying to find their footing. They're trying to figure out what exactly their, political attacks are going to be against the presumptive nominee in Kamala Harris. And at this point, I mean, the near assassination feels like a lifetime ago. It was 2.5 weeks ago, not even 20 days ago. And it feels like the momentum coming out of that has been zapped. And part of that is because the Democrats did switch out their candidate, and they've got the media in, full-blown propaganda mode on behalf of Kamala Harris, who was not a well-liked candidate by her own party. She didn't even make it to the Iowa caucuses 4 years ago, but they're treating her like she's the female Obama when she's not. I mean, she is not the political talent that Barack Obama was or is. He is wildly talented as a politician. She is not. But the media is trying to make her out to be that. And listen, that will wear off. But that's where all the energy in the room has gone, is to Kamala Harris. And while that will eventually subside, how much, who knows, Trump's got to get that momentum back. It kind of feels like, if we're in a football game here, you're controlling the clock, you're controlling the game. Trump was doing that in complete control of the game up until, a week and a day ago, a week and 2 days ago. He was running the ball. He was getting 7 yards on that first down rush. He was throwing the ball with ease down the field. He had it all cooking. And then his opponent made some changes at halftime, and now it feels like Team Trump, in this case, is not controlling the clock or controlling the game like they were a week and a half ago. And now they've got to figure out what's going to work. They've got to adjust to the adjustment that was made to them, because they had this thing all mapped out perfectly to beat Joe Biden. But now you're dealing with a different candidate and a different person, and the attacks against Joe Biden, the political attacks against Joe Biden, the most effective one was what? The guy's old and senile and doesn't know what he's saying and where he is. That doesn't work for Kamala Harris. You can say a lot of things about Kamala Harris, but that's not one of them. So you basically have to go back to the drawing board and figure out what the most impactful political attack is going to be. And they're still kind of feeling that out. And there's time to do it, but they're still trying to feel that out in terms of what's going to be the most effective and what's going to work the best for their campaign going forward. And that's what I think the next couple of weeks are going to be about, leading up to that convention, which takes place in Chicago starting on August 19th. But there will be great Democratic momentum probably through that convention. Well, they'll show unity for Kamala Harris. A lot of it will be probably fake and phony, but they will show great enthusiasm and unity on television. And then I think once we get to Labor Day is when you're going to start to see kind of that separation. What does Team Trump think works for them to try to close this election out over the final 2 months, and what does Team Kamala think works best for them? Although we already know what their blueprint is going to be. Drive up the female vote and hammer, abortion, climate change, and things like that. And if it works, well, it's going to be a hell of a 4-year run after that.